Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. And today's episode is Bleach, Soul Society, the Sneak Entry Arc, Episode 32, The Star and the Stray Dog. Episode in a nutshell is a brief reminder of what happened in the episode. So this episode is essentially a flashback. Renji, after he makes that, agonized yell at the end of the last episode, starts to reminisce about his past and how he met Rukia, how they both were in Soul Society as children in one of the um, less peaceful or safe areas of Soul Society, and how they had to thieve on the streets and basically stayed in a area, like a building that had a bunch of other children too, and they became friends, close like family. However, as they grew up, only Rukia and Renji had spiritual power, their other friends didn't, and they somehow ended up dying while being already dead as they grew, so Renji and Rukia decided to enter the Shinigami Academy, and they attend classes together, becoming a Shinigami. However, Renji then walks in on Rukia in a meeting with Byakuya and a few other Shinigami officials, and she informs Renji that they have offered to adopt her, and when they adopt her, they will allow her to graduate early from the Shinigami school, and she'll be able to enter the 13 squads right away. And Renji, despite losing his friend, ends up acting really happy for her, making a big deal about how exciting it is and that it's such a great thing for her, blah, blah, blah. And she basically, because he's putting on the show of being so happy for her, decides to ultimately accept the adoption. And we then return to the present where Renji is still very upset and talks about how he's always felt like a stray dog who howls at stars, and then he begs Ichigo to save Rukia, which he was going to do anyways, as that was his entire purpose in being there. And of course, Ichigo then promises once again that, yeah, I'm gonna continue to do what I was doing anyways, and I will save Rukia. And that is how this episode ends. So now it's time to rank the episode, and as always, we'll be ranking on our mostly objective ranking, followed by the personal ranking. Now, you might have noticed I paused briefly, and that's because I realized I could potentially make an honorable mention here. I didn't give the points while watching, but upon further thought, after having voiced out the summary, I do think we could have failed emotional impact as a negative point if we wanted to, because I think Renji's emotional plea was supposed to make us emotional as viewers. However, like I said in the summary, Ichigo was already saving Rukia. That's the whole reason he was here. So him emotionally pleading for him to save Rukia is okay, but he's already doing that. So it fails. But I'm not going to take the points for it because I didn't think of it while watching the episode, only after saying the summary. So I'm just putting it as an honorable mention. We could have taken points for that. I didn't, though. On to what points I actually gave in this episode. First off, resolved battle. Now, at the end of the last episode, obviously, we had our final blows between Renji and Ichigo right at the end. However, we didn't know that was the end of the battle because, Renji's scream could have also been him gaining his own resolve to come back at Ichigo yet again. It wasn't necessarily that it was the end of the battle. So at the end of the last episode, it wasn't clear the battle had ended. However, at the end of this episode, with Renji not attacking Ichigo, but instead begging for him to save Rukia after ruminating on their past, I would say the battle has now been resolved, at least This battle has been resolved between Ichigo and Renji, and so I am giving the points in this episode +2. Then we had our multi-arc supporting character development, which of course is Renji's origin and past, his backstory with Rukia. That's worth 3 points. And then we had our multi-arc main character development, which of course is Rukia's past and her meeting Renji, her childhood, and then of course her being adopted. So both of their pasts are there. And that's bringing us up to 8 points already. Then we had an additional 4 points for world building, which is, of course, the fact that there are schools for the Shinigami, and also that Shinigami start out as, well, not all of them, because there's obviously like noble families, and they do note at the school that there are a lot that come from the castle town, as they call them. So not all, but some of the Shinigami do originate from souls that just happen to have high spiritual power and then, go to the training at the Shinigami school and then eventually become Shinigami themselves. So Shinigami aren't something you need to be born, it's something that you can become, which I think is interesting and a choice. So worth 4 points. But we did have some negatives as well. And that, of course, was our minimal plot progression. Like, I wouldn't call this a filler episode because, it's still connected to what's happening to the story, but we didn't really get any plot progression in the episode, similarly to a filler episode, because it was all like the entire thing was a flashback. And then, Renji asked Ichigo to just do what he was already doing in a very emotional way. And so I didn't feel like we moved forward on the plot. We got some interesting information, but we didn't move forward on the plot. So that's -2. The other -2 is the negative messaging or behavior. And that, of course, is the theft. Um, when we first meet Renji and his friends before they meet Rukia, they're stealing water from a merchant on the street, basically, Aladining so that they can get water, which they can then bring back to the other children. And so there's that. And then they meet Rukia on the way after stealing. They're, of course, running away from the consequences of their actions. And Rukia assists them in their escape, and that is how they meet. And she becomes part of the crew, part of the friend group. And of course, thievery is against the law, therefore negative messaging or behavior, and also -2. It does ultimately leave this episode as a 9 out of 10. So now we have our mostly objective rankings for the arc so far, and in first we have Enter the World of the Shinigami, The Man Who Hates Shinigami, Assemble the Gotai 13, Formation, The Worst Tag, The Resolution to Kill, Renji's Confrontation, The Star and the Stray Dog, 14 Days Until Rukia's Execution, Penetrate the Center with an Enormous Bombshell, Orihime Targeted, Release the Death Blow, and then in last place we have Breakthrough the Shinigami's Encompassing Net. So my personal ranking for this episode. Like I said, I didn't feel like a lot happened. The emotional plea really failed for me because he's basically asking Ichigo to already do what he's already doing. Just now he's more confident that he can do it because he beat him in a battle, but like the whole purpose of Ichigo and his friends being there is to save Rukia. So obviously they're going to save Rukia. He was already doing that, so you begging him with tears in your eyes to go save Rukia is like, yeah, that's what he was doing. Still gonna do it. Totally wasted your energy and your emotion on that. But it does make for, like that the dramatic moments and such. But again, like he was already doing that, so wasted energy. And then the flashback was interesting, how they met, how they became Shinigami. It does, however, leave me very confused. I'm very confused. And I don't know if this is ever addressed in the future in the series or if it's just like an oversight. But My understanding was that, we have the earth, and that is where people live their lives. And then upon dying, their immortal souls then are able to move on to soul society, where they then, live in soul society for eternity. And then now we find out after entering soul society that that actually isn't the case. Shinigami can fully die. The souls can fully die, but it's not really clear. Well, then, if soul society is where you go after death, and then you die, where do you go next? Like, is there like a multi-tiered system here where we go soul society, somewhere else, somewhere else, somewhere else? Like, how exactly can a dead person die again in soul society? How they like mention how the reason they enter the Shinigami academy, school, whatever, was because their friend group who didn't have spiritual powers like they did ended up dying. Additionally, if you are a dead soul and you enter into soul society, how are you still aging? And it's confusing to me because some Shinigami seem to not age and have been alive for hundreds of years, and then you have like these others where it's like, well, they started as children here and now they're adults, so they clearly aged. Like, who's aging? Why are they aging? What makes them age? How do they decide who's going to age and who isn't? It's just very confusing because they don't seem to have like a set rule on these things. And it's pretty obvious that they don't have a set rule on these things. And I'm just very confused about like exactly what Shinigami are, what soul society is. Because like in my mind, if you die as a child, then your soul would remain that of a child in the afterlife because that's as far as you got. And then likewise, I understand some souls would be stronger than others, so the fact that a soul could evolve into a Shinigami, and like, therefore, like, are Shinigami actually gods, or are they just really strong souls, and their job is being a god of death? Like, that also confuses me, like, if it's, like, Shinigami is a god of death, but you would think to be a god, you would think you would need to either be born that way or there'd be some sort of like transmutation or something that would happen to turn you into a god, not just I'm a normal soul, but oh, I got a little bit of extra power, so now I get to be a god. Like, I feel very confused about this whole concept. Like, I feel like it's not fleshed out very well. And I mean, to be fair, it is a kids manga. It's shonen, which is like boys. It's not even like an adult men's manga, it's like a boys manga, so I get that, like, they probably don't care about the world building as much as the actual action and the battles and whatnot, but it's still, to me, as an audience, when I'm sitting here trying to analyze it for these videos, I'm going like, I am confused, I don't know what the rules are, and the rules seem to be different for everybody. So there's my little bit of a mini rant, and ultimately, this flashback basically brought more questions than answers, and while I did enjoy getting to know a little bit more about some of the characters' pasts, I also felt like it didn't move the plot forward very much, so I ultimately decided that this was going to be an episode 6 out of 10, is what I scored it. And that brings the personal ranking so far to: in first we have the resolution to kill, enter the world of the Shinigami, formation the worst tag, penetrate the center with an enormous bombshell, Renji's confrontation. This episode came in 6th place, the star and the stray dog. Then we have assemble the Gotai 13, 14 days until Rukia's execution, release the death blow, break through the Shinigami's encompassing net, the man who hates Shinigami, and then Orihime targeted. Bringing us now to the series ranking so far, and on our mostly objective ranking, Agent of the Shinigami arc ended with 84%, and Soul Society the Sneak Entry arc so far has a score of 99 out of a possible 210. On the personal ranking side, Agent of the Shinigami arc ended with 63%, and Soul Society the Sneak Entry arc ends with, well, not ends with, so far has 71 out of 210. And with that, we've now rewatched and ranked Bleach, Soul Society, The Sneak Entry Arc, Episode 32, The Star and the Stray Dog. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.